He told her she was too ordinary for his world and left her standing in tears beneath the lights of New York. But years later, when his empire began to crumble, the same woman he rejected walked back into his office not for revenge, but to decide his future. This is the story of the woman who turned heartbreak into power and made the millionaire face the one thing he could never buy: regret. The city lights of New York glimmered through the glass walls of the Walker Enterprises building, reflecting in Emma Collins's tear-filled eyes. She stood across from Ethan Walker, her voice trembling as she tried to understand how love could turn so cold. "You're not ambitious enough for my world, Emma," he said flatly, adjusting his cufflinks without looking at her. His words sliced through her like ice, leaving her breathless. She had spent months dreaming of a life with him, believing that their connection could overcome the difference in their worlds. He was the rising star of Wall Street, confident, ruthless, admired. She was a simple intern, driven by kindness and ideals. When she whispered, "I thought you believed in me," Ethan gave a faint smile that never reached his eyes. "I need a partner who understands success," he replied. The office fell silent, except for the ticking of the clock. Emma could feel her heart breaking in rhythm with each sound. She turned toward the window, blinking away tears as the skyline blurred. She realized that she had given him not only her affection, but her belief in herself. Now, standing in his office, she felt smaller than ever, a shadow fading in his world of power. Gathering the last fragments of dignity, Emma took a deep breath. "Someday," she said softly, "you'll see that ambition isn't the same as greed." Ethan said nothing, already returning to his laptop, as if she had ceased to exist. That indifference hurt more than the rejection itself. As she left the office, her heels echoed in the marble hallway, each step carrying away the remnants of who she used to be. Outside, the cold winter wind met her tears, freezing them midstream. She looked up at the skyscrapers and whispered, "One day, I'll walk back into a place like this, and I won't be the one leaving in tears." That night, Emma packed her life into 2 suitcases and bought a one-way ticket to London. The city that had witnessed her heartbreak would no longer define her. In the plane's reflection, she saw a fragile girl turning into something stronger, someone new. As the aircraft lifted into the dark sky, Emma promised herself she would never chase validation again. She would build her own empire brick by brick, deal by deal. The pain Ethan caused would become the fire that forged her resolve. Far below, Ethan returned to his penthouse, pouring himself a drink, unaware of the storm he had just created. For him, the moment was nothing, just another conversation. For her, it was everything. He believed he had closed a chapter. He didn't realize he had just written the prologue to the story that would one day destroy his pride. Have you ever felt invisible, only to promise yourself you'd rise again? If this moment touched you, subscribe and stay with us, because her story is just beginning, and so is yours. 5 years later, the skyline of London sparkled in the morning sun, and Emma Collins was no longer the girl who once wept over lost love. She was the sharp, confident CEO of Collins Capital, one of the fastest-growing investment firms in Europe. Her name commanded respect, and her calm authority made even seasoned bankers nervous. She had learned to walk with grace through boardrooms filled with power-hungry men. Her quiet strength, her intelligence, and her unwillingness to compromise had become her armor. Behind her calm expression, however, still lived the memory of the man who told her she wasn't enough. On a brisk Monday morning, her assistant entered the office with a folder. "Emma, we've received a partnership proposal from a U.S. company, Walker Enterprises," she said, pausing. Emma froze for a moment, the familiar name hitting her like an unexpected gust of wind. Her heart skipped, but her voice remained steady. "Schedule the meeting." That afternoon, she stood by the window of her high-rise office, staring across the Thames. She had spent years building this life, this reputation. She had no reason to look back. But deep inside, a quiet voice whispered, "This is your moment." When the meeting invitation arrived, it was set for the following week in New York. Returning there would mean confronting everything she had once run from: the man, the city, the pain. But this time, she wouldn't return as the girl who cried in his office. She would return as the woman who could buy it. She closed the folder and smiled faintly. "Let's prepare the terms," she told her assistant. "I don't invest in desperation, I invest in transformation." Those words, calm and measured, became her mantra for the days ahead. That night, in the privacy of her penthouse, Emma allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The city lights of London reminded her of the ones she left behind in New York, but now she was the one towering above them. She didn't want revenge. She wanted acknowledgement from herself, more than anyone else, that she had become everything she was told she couldn't be. The next morning, she packed her suitcase again, but this time there were no tears, only determination. The flight to New York would not be a return to the past. It would be her arrival in a new era. As her plane took off, Emma closed her eyes and whispered the same promise she made years ago, but now it sounded different. One day has become today. The towering glass building of Walker Enterprises looked exactly as she remembered, sharp, cold, and powerful. Emma's heels clicked against the marble floor as she entered, every sound echoing the confidence she had once lacked. The receptionist's polite smile couldn't hide the curiosity in her eyes. Everyone could sense that the woman walking in wasn't just another client. Emma's calm gaze swept across the lobby, silently reclaiming the space that once broke her. When she stepped into the boardroom, the air seemed to freeze. Ethan Walker was standing by the window, speaking to his executives, his voice still as commanding as she remembered. But when he turned and saw her, the words died in his throat. His mind struggled to connect the woman before him, poised, elegant, untouchable, with the girl he had dismissed years ago. "Miss Collins," he finally said, masking his shock with a forced smile. Emma extended her hand with quiet grace. "Mr. Walker, it's been a while." Her tone was professional, distant, yet heavy with unspoken history. He took her hand, and for a second, the tension between them felt almost tangible. His eyes searched hers for any trace of the woman he once knew, but all he saw was composure and power. She took her seat, effortlessly commanding the room. Throughout the meeting, Emma led every conversation, dismantling financial projections and questioning company weaknesses with surgical precision. Ethan, once the man who spoke over her, found himself struggling to keep up. His pride burned, but his admiration grew with every word she spoke. Her intelligence wasn't just impressive, it was disarming. The woman he underestimated now outshined him entirely. As the meeting concluded, Emma closed her tablet and rose from her chair. "We'll consider your proposal," she said evenly, "but if I invest, it won't be a favor, it'll be a strategic decision." With that, she turned and walked out, leaving silence in her wake. Ethan watched her go, realizing for the first time that power wasn't about dominance, it was about presence. And hers filled every inch of that room. Ethan sat in his office after the meeting, staring at the city below. His reflection in the glass seemed older, heavier, burdened by mistakes he could no longer ignore. He had built his empire on control, but one look at Emma had shattered that illusion. For the first time in years, he felt the sting of regret. "How did I not see what she could become?" he whispered to himself, the question hanging in the still air. Across the city, Emma sat in her hotel suite, reviewing numbers on her laptop but unable to silence her racing thoughts. The meeting had gone exactly as planned, yet something in Ethan's eyes lingered in her mind. He had looked lost, but she quickly shut the thought away. Compassion was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had worked too hard to let emotion weaken her again. The next morning, headlines began to appear. Collins Capital considers bailout for Walker Enterprises. The media buzzed with speculation. Was Emma Collins there for business or revenge? Every outlet dug into her past, resurfacing old photos of her as a shy intern beside Ethan. Watching the coverage, Emma sighed. "They love a woman's success," she murmured, "until they remember who she used to be." Later that day, Ethan reached out for a private dinner meeting, claiming it was about finalizing numbers. She hesitated before accepting, aware that this was more than business. When she arrived at the upscale restaurant, he was already there alone, waiting. His expression softened when he saw her, the sharp CEO replaced by a man unsure of his footing. "Emma," he said quietly, "thank you for coming." She sat down, her posture straight and eyes unreadable. "Let's be clear, Ethan," she said calmly. "This dinner is about the deal, nothing more." He nodded, but his gaze lingered on her with a mixture of guilt and fascination. For him, it was a chance to make amends. For her, it was a reminder that no apology could rewrite the past. The balance of power had shifted, and this time it was hers to hold. Sophie Lane Walker was the kind of woman who made people turn their heads, flawless, confident, and dangerously aware of her beauty. When she heard Emma Collins's name during a board meeting, her smile froze for just a moment. Memories of the quiet intern she once mocked flashed through her mind, like ghosts refusing to rest. "Emma Collins," she repeated with a forced laugh. "I didn't know she was still in the business world." That evening, as Ethan arrived home, Sophie was already waiting, dressed impeccably, holding a glass of wine. "So," she began sweetly, "how was your meeting with the new investor?" Her tone dripped with curiosity wrapped in poison. Ethan's silence confirmed everything she suspected. "Emma Collins," she whispered, her voice sharp now. "She's the one handling our deal, isn't she?" He looked away, unwilling to feed her jealousy. Sophie's anger wasn't rooted in love. It was fear. She had fought too hard to maintain her perfect life, to keep her husband's name shining among New York's elite. If Emma came back into his orbit, everything could crumble. She poured another glass of wine and muttered to herself, "Not again. I won't let some girl from nowhere ruin what I built." The next day she called an old contact at a financial magazine, pretending it was casual conversation. Within hours, whispers began to circulate, stories questioning Emma's past, her methods, her motives. "A self-made investor or a woman with unfinished business," read one headline. Sophie smiled at the chaos she had set in motion, confident that Emma wouldn't survive the storm. But Sophie underestimated her. When Emma saw the headlines, she didn't flinch. Instead, she stood before her mirror, adjusted her blazer and whispered, "If they want a fight, I'll give them one, but not the way they expect." For Emma, silence had always been her greatest weapon. She didn't shout. She simply showed them. The dinner with Ethan lingered in Emma's mind longer than she wanted to admit. His sincerity had caught her off guard, but she reminded herself that sincerity was easy when you were desperate. Back in her hotel room, she reviewed the company's files late into the night, finding evidence of internal mismanagement numbers that didn't add up, deals that smelled of betrayal. "He's not the only one drowning," she murmured. The next morning, Ethan arrived at his office to find Emma waiting in the conference room, her tone sharper than ever. "Your financial reports are inconsistent," she said, sliding the documents across the table. "Either your team is incompetent or someone's lying to you." His jaw tightened. He had prided himself on control, but the empire he built was unraveling in front of her eyes, and she saw it. When the door opened and Sophie walked in unexpectedly, the temperature in the room dropped. She smiled too brightly, pretending surprise. "Emma Collins, I didn't realize you were back in New York," she said, her tone sugar-coated but her eyes glacial. Emma rose politely, returning the smile. "It's good to see you, Sophie. I'm surprised you remember me." The air between them crackled with unspoken history. Ethan tried to smooth the tension, but the damage was done. The two women stood as symbols of his choices, one born of pride, the other of pain. Sophie placed a hand on his arm possessively, her message clear, "He's mine." Emma, unmoved, gathered her files and said coolly, "I'll send you my updated terms by tomorrow." Then she walked out, her presence still lingering long after the door closed. As the elevator descended, Emma allowed herself a single deep breath. She wasn't just negotiating a deal, she was navigating a battlefield, and while Sophie played with gossip, Emma played with results. "Let them underestimate me," she whispered. "That's how I win." The city lights flickered against the glass, reflecting the face of a woman who had learned to turn heartbreak into power. By Monday morning, every business outlet in New York was buzzing with the same story. Headlines screamed across glossy screens, "Ethan Walker's mysterious ex returns power or payback." Emma's face appeared on every major finance site, framed by speculation and scandal. Reporters camped outside her hotel, desperate for a quote. The world loved watching a woman rise only to question if she deserved to stand so high. Ethan stormed into his office, slamming his phone onto the desk. "Who leaked this?" he barked, his anger thinly veiling his fear. His assistant stammered something about Sophie's connections, but Ethan already knew. The puzzle pieces fit too perfectly. He felt the ground shifting beneath him. The empire he had built on appearances was collapsing, and Sophie was pulling the strings. Meanwhile, Emma sat calmly at a cafe across from Central Park, sipping her coffee as flashes from paparazzi cameras reflected off the glass. Daniel Brooks sat opposite her, laptop open, eyes scanning the headlines. "They're trying to make you look like the villain," he said. Emma smiled faintly. "Let them. Every story has a villain until the truth rewrites it." She closed her laptop and stood. "We don't react, we move." That afternoon she met with her PR team, not to defend herself, but to redirect the narrative. She didn't deny anything, she simply presented results, data, investments, and growth. By the evening the headlines had changed tone. Emma Collins from assistant to asset. The world was remembering why she mattered. She didn't need sympathy, she demanded respect. Across the city, Sophie watched the news in disbelief, realizing her plan had backfired. The woman she tried to destroy was now more admired than ever. "She's not supposed to win this easily," Sophie muttered, pacing her penthouse. But Emma wasn't winning easily, she was simply winning differently, quietly, completely. Emma's schedule grew relentless: investor calls, media interviews, and strategy meetings. Yet beneath her polished calm, exhaustion tugged at her edges. At night, when the city slept, she stared out the window, remembering the girl who once wept in Ethan's office. That version of her still lived somewhere inside, whispering, "You did it." But success, she had learned, was a lonely kind of triumph. Ethan, on the other hand, was unraveling. His board was losing faith, and whispers of bankruptcy filled the halls. He tried to contact Emma, but her assistant politely declined each request. It was Daniel who finally relented, arranging a private meeting. When Ethan arrived, his arrogance was gone, replaced by quiet desperation. "I need your help," he admitted. The words tasted bitter. Emma studied him across the table, her expression unreadable. "Help isn't something you ask for when it's convenient," she said softly. "It's something you earn." She handed him a folder of documents outlining the company's internal corruption. "Your downfall isn't my doing, Ethan. It's the cost of ignoring people who cared." Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned with truth. The next day, headlines shifted again. Walker Enterprises faces internal fraud investigation. The public saw Ethan's empire cracking, while Emma's firm continued to rise. She didn't celebrate, she analyzed. Every move, every word mattered now. Daniel watched her in silence, finally saying, "You could destroy him completely if you wanted." Emma turned to him with a sad smile. "And what would that make me?" That night, alone in her suite, she removed her jewelry and let her reflection stare back at her. The woman in the mirror was powerful, composed, but tired. "You wanted to prove something," she whispered to herself. "Now prove you still have a heart." Her phone buzzed a message from Ethan. "Thank you for the truth." She didn't reply, but her fingers lingered over the screen longer than she expected. The morning air in New York was heavy with tension as Ethan arrived at the office, pale and sleepless. His CFO handed him a confidential report, and the numbers confirmed his worst fear: millions had vanished from company accounts. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages, realizing that the embezzlement wasn't random. It was deliberate. Someone inside had been bleeding the company dry for years. Emma received the same report from her analyst team just hours later. When she opened the file, one name appeared repeatedly across the fraudulent transfers: Sophie Lane Walker. Emma stared at it in silence, feeling no triumph, only a cold certainty. She had suspected manipulation, but not to this degree. Sophie hadn't just betrayed Ethan, she had sabotaged everything to protect her lifestyle. That evening, Ethan showed up unannounced at Emma's penthouse. His eyes were red, his voice hoarse. "It's Sophie," he confessed, barely audible. "She's been stealing from me for years." For a moment, Emma saw not the man who once broke her, but a human being stripped of all his pride. She offered him a seat, but no comfort. "Now you know what happens," she said quietly, "when you underestimate people who seem weak." They sat in silence, the city glittering below them like a distant promise. Ethan looked at her with genuine remorse. "I don't deserve your help," he said, "but I don't know who else to trust." Emma turned toward the window, her reflection layered over the skyline. "You don't need my trust," she replied. "You need redemption. Prove you can rebuild without destroying someone this time." As he left, she felt an unfamiliar ache in her chest. Pity? Empathy? Perhaps both. She had dreamed of this moment of seeing him humbled, broken, but now that it had come, victory felt hollow. In her heart, a question lingered. Was revenge really worth the pieces of herself she'd lose to achieve it? Days passed, and the city whispered about Ethan Walker's downfall. Investors pulled out, board members resigned, and Sophie vanished from the media spotlight. Meanwhile, Emma was the name on everyone's lips, the woman who had seen the storm coming and stayed unshaken. But success didn't bring her peace. Instead, it brought a gnawing restlessness she couldn't silence. Daniel noticed it before she did. "You're not sleeping," he said gently as they reviewed new contracts. Emma shrugged, forcing a smile. "Sleep is for people who have something left to dream about." But he didn't laugh. "You've already won, Emma," he said softly. "Now you have to decide what kind of winner you want to be." His words lingered, echoing through the walls of her carefully constructed empire. That evening, Emma stood before her window, the same skyline that once represented her pain now reflecting her power. She thought of Sophie, lost in the wreckage of her own greed. She thought of Ethan, stripped of everything but humility. And finally, she thought of herself, the woman who had built a kingdom out of heartbreak. The question was no longer if she could win. It was what victory meant. When Ethan called, his voice was steady but subdued. "I've decided to resign as CEO," he said. "If the company is to survive, it should be under someone who knows what integrity looks like." There was a pause. "Someone like you." Emma's silence spoke louder than words. It wasn't an offer. It was a surrender and a test. She looked out into the night, her reflection caught between darkness and light. "You'll have my answer tomorrow," she said finally. As she hung up, her heart pounded, not from anger, but from the weight of the decision ahead. Was this her chance to complete her revenge, or to rewrite her story entirely? The next morning, the boardroom of Walker Enterprises buzzed with tension. Reporters lined the hallway, cameras flashing as whispers of scandal filled the air. Emma arrived with quiet poise, her presence instantly commanding attention. Ethan stood at the head of the table, pale and tense, prepared to announce his resignation. But before he could speak, the doors burst open and Sophie Lane Walker swept in like a storm. Dressed in white and smiling with venom, Sophie raised her phone high, recording the moment. "Before you all hand this company to your new savior," she said mockingly, "maybe you should know who she really is." Gasps echoed through the room as she projected old photos Emma as an intern, shy, in love, standing beside Ethan. "This is your investor," Sophie sneered. A woman scorned, playing at power. Ethan's jaw clenched, his shame visible, but he didn't stay silent. "Enough, Sophie," he said, his voice firm. "Yes, I hurt her. Yes, I was blind. But Emma Collins built herself from nothing while you stole everything in sight." The room fell silent. The very man who once dismissed her was now her defender. For the first time, Sophie's confidence faltered. Emma remained composed, her expression unreadable. When Sophie finally stopped talking, Emma walked forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "You're right, Sophie," she said softly. "I was the girl who believed in him. And I was the woman who believed in myself when no one else did." Her voice cut through the silence. "That's the difference between us, I built. You pretended." Security escorted Sophie out as the board watched in stunned silence. Ethan turned to Emma, his eyes filled with something she hadn't seen in years, respect. "You could have humiliated her," he said quietly. "Why didn't you?" Emma gathered her papers and met his gaze. "Because dignity doesn't need an audience," she replied. and revenge doesn't build anything worth keeping. The fallout from Sophie's outburst was swift and brutal. Every major outlet ran the story, painting her as the architect of Walker Enterprises' collapse. Ethan's resignation came the next morning, and the board unanimously offered the CEO position to Emma Collins. Standing before the cameras, she accepted with calm grace, her voice steady. "This isn't a takeover," she said. "It's a rebuilding." The crowd erupted in applause. Behind the headlines, however, the moment was bittersweet. Emma walked through the same corridors where she had once been dismissed as unambitious. Now employees greeted her with admiration and hope. Yet, instead of triumph, she felt only peace, a quiet, grounded kind that came from knowing she had nothing left to prove. Her victory wasn't loud. It was complete. Later that evening, Ethan visited her office one last time. He stood in the doorway, hesitant, as if unsure he had the right to be there. "You did it," he said finally. "You turned everything around." Emma smiled faintly, gesturing toward the city lights beyond the glass. "No, Ethan, we did. You let go, and that's harder than people think." For a brief moment, their eyes met, not as rivals, but as equals. He extended his hand and she took it, a gesture of closure, not romance. "Thank you," he said sincerely, "not for saving the company, for reminding me what integrity looks like." Emma nodded, her voice soft. "You reminded me too that strength isn't the absence of feeling. It's the choice to keep standing anyway." He smiled, and with that he left her life quietly, finally at peace. When the door closed, Emma turned to the window, her reflection merging with the city skyline. The empire she now ruled had once belonged to the man who doubted her. But she didn't feel like she'd taken something from him. She felt like she'd taken something back, her worth, her power, her story. And this time, no one could rewrite it but her. Sophie Lane Walker's world collapsed faster than she could comprehend. Within a week, her assets were frozen, her name splashed across every tabloid headline. The same people who once invited her to charity galas now whispered behind her back. Her phone stopped ringing, and her so-called friends vanished. For the first time in her life, silence surrounded her, and it was deafening. In a small apartment downtown, Sophie watched the news replay Emma's rise. Emma Collins, the woman who saved Walker Enterprises. The words burned, but not with jealousy, with realization. She had spent her life pretending to be powerful, while Emma had become it. "I built everything on lies," Sophie whispered to her reflection. "And she built everything I never had respect." Days later, she received a letter delivered by hand. It was from Emma. Inside was a single sentence: "Even when you lose everything, you can still choose who you'll be next." Sophie sat in silence for a long time, the words echoing in her mind. No threat, no gloating, just truth. It was the first kindness anyone had shown her in years. For a moment, tears filled her eyes. She folded the letter carefully and placed it beside her glass of untouched wine. Somewhere deep inside, she envied Emma not for her success, but for her peace. "Maybe," Sophie murmured, "power isn't about winning. Maybe it's about knowing when to stop fighting." It was the first honest thing she had said in a long time. As the night grew quiet, Sophie turned off the television and opened her window to the cool city air. The same skyline that once represented her vanity now felt like forgiveness. For the first time, she didn't crave to be seen. She simply wanted to be real. And perhaps that was the beginning of redemption. Months later, Walker Enterprises stood stronger than ever under Emma's leadership. Profits soared, partnerships expanded, and the company's image transformed from scandal to symbol of resilience. In every headline, one phrase repeated: "Integrity rebuilt the empire." But behind the success, Emma's greatest accomplishment wasn't financial, it was personal. She had reclaimed herself, not just her power. In the quiet of her new office, she often thought of the journey that had brought her here, from the intern in tears to the CEO everyone admired. The walls no longer felt cold. They hummed with energy, with stories of survival. And yet, even surrounded by triumph, she remained humble. "Strength," she once told her staff, "isn't about standing taller than others. It's about standing after you've fallen. Ethan, now living a quieter life consulting for smaller companies, occasionally sent her brief updates. Their relationship was professional but warm, two people who had finally made peace with their past. When he thanked her for saving the company again, she replied simply, "You saved yourself. I just reminded you that you could." He smiled at the message for a long time before deleting it, as if preserving its meaning privately. One afternoon, as she left a conference, a young intern approached her nervously. "Miss Collins," she said, "you inspire me. They say you were once ordinary." Emma laughed softly. "We're all ordinary," she replied. "The difference is what we decide to do about it." The girl smiled, her eyes wide with hope. Emma saw in her a reflection of who she once was, and it filled her with gratitude. That night, Emma walked along the Hudson River, the city lights dancing on the water's surface. She wasn't chasing validation anymore. She was walking in harmony with her past. The world had once told her she wasn't enough, and she had proven that she always was, not because of wealth or revenge, but because she had learned the greatest lesson of all: power is quiet, and peace is earned. A year had passed since Emma Collins rebuilt Walker Enterprises, turning its name into a beacon of renewal. Her days were filled with meetings, travel, and quiet victories, but somewhere between the noise of success, a subtle emptiness lingered, the kind that no empire could fill. She had won every battle, silenced every doubt, yet sometimes late at night, she wondered if peace meant being alone. One evening, while reviewing reports in her office, her assistant entered holding a familiar-looking envelope. "It was hand-delivered," she said softly. Emma hesitated before opening it. Inside, a short letter, elegant, sincere. "I'm starting over. A small consulting firm. Nothing big, but it feels honest. I wanted you to know that your strength gave me courage to rebuild mine. Ethan." For a moment she simply stared at the words, silent. The next day, she found herself outside a modest cafe near the edge of Central Park, the return address written on the envelope. Through the glass, she saw Ethan sitting alone, reading a newspaper, no bodyguards, no designer suit. Just a man. When he looked up and saw her, surprise flickered across his face, followed by something softer, gratitude. He stood, uncertain, as she entered. They sat together, the silence between them no longer heavy, but human. "I didn't expect to see you," Ethan said quietly. Emma smiled faintly. "Neither did I." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I lost everything I thought mattered, and somehow, that's what set me free." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "That's what losing does. It strips away the noise until only truth remains." As they left the cafe, the city lights shimmered through the early evening haze. Ethan turned to her. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said softly, "but I do hope for a second chance, not in business, but in life." Emma paused, her gaze on the skyline that had witnessed both her pain and her triumph. "Maybe," she said finally. "Some stories don't end, they just begin again." She smiled, and for the first time in years, her heart felt light. In the end, she didn't win by taking revenge. She won by finding peace. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving them wrong. It's proving to yourself that you were always enough. If this story moved you, leave a comment below and tell us what you'd do if you were in her place. And don't forget, like, subscribe, and stay with us for more stories that prove strength doesn't shout, it whispers.